Hello, subscribers! You are watching the fourth video in a 9-part series where I rate every anime I've ever seen, with a few caveats that I mentioned in the first video. In this video, I am covering the second season flops. These are animes that had either a really good first season, or at least a decent first season, but then the second season just plummeted to different degrees. Some of them started okay and then just went horrible, and some started great and just went bad. And a couple of them you can just get away with only watching the first season. So without further ado, let's begin. Magic Knight Wraith's target demographic is clearly 14-year-old girls, and it is an older anime. Nevertheless, it is well worth watching.
Three junior high school girls, Hikaru Shido, Umi Ryuzaki, and Fu Hooji. The moment they first met high atop Tokyo Tower, the three found themselves inexplainably transported to another world called Sephiroth.
And their job in Sephiroth is to become the Magic Knights and save Sephiroth from falling apart because the pillar of Sephiroth, Princess Emerald, was kidnapped by Zagato. Most of the entire season is them learning how to become Magic Knights and upgrade their equipment by learning lessons of friendship and stuff like that. It might only be a 3-star anime if it wasn't for the ending. The ending isn't exactly what you expect, and it ends up being a very somber ending. The twist ending, I think, is what really propels this anime, or this season of the anime, from a 3-star to a 4-star. But one other thing happens in the last episode, I think it is, one of the last scenes, where they're getting ready to finish their mission and defeat the big bad, and they're going through these flashbacks of all the stuff they've learned along the way. Very cliche and sappy. However, it's vastly improved upon by the introduction of the English opening theme. The last time I watched this, I could have sworn the opening of each episode used the Japanese opening. There's a Japanese version and an English version for the opening theme song. So to hear the Japanese opener all throughout the whole season, and then in this last episode, during this scene, hear the English opening, that was something special. Of course, then when I was looking for video clips of this, I noticed the English opener in the opening of the anime. I don't know if I'm misremembering, even though it was not that long ago that I rewatched it, or if it's just different depending on which website you go to watch it on. But I do think the best version is one where you have the Japanese lyrics in the opener, and in that one scene near the end, they have the English version. That works really well, and vastly improves on what is otherwise a very cliche and sappy scene. The second season of Magic Knight Wraith is gonna do something I feel is gonna be a running theme throughout this video, where it feels like it was done by a different studio. More specifically, it actually feels like some soccer mom bought stock in a majority stock in all the studio, and came in demanding they make the second season and fix everything that she felt was wrong with the first one, without, completely changing the story.
What? Why'd you kill off Persea? Bring her back. I liked her. And don't just bring her back. Make her the identical twin. People love that. And this show is supposed to be for 14-year-old girls. 14-year-old girls love true love stories. So everybody falls in love. Umi falls in love. Fu falls in love. Hikaru falls in love. Everybody falls in love. Everybody has a true love. Make it so.
And so we get a bunch of stupid true love stories that, most of them can just be answered with the phrase, for some reason. Fu and Fairy will fall in love. That actually happens in the first season, so that's fine. They set up for that. That one works. No problem. Alcyone is desperately in love with Zagato. Again, They set that up in the first season. That's fine, although she does get a little crazy about it. But then, out of nowhere, Geraldina and Lafarga are in love for some reason. And then Lady Oscar is in love with her boy manservant, and maybe he's in love with her too. Who knows? They're both too young to really be in love anyway. But this is season 2 of Magic Knight Rayearth, so they must be in love. And after only meeting for one day, Hikaru and Lantis fall in love with each other, even though Lantis is clearly way too old to be going out with a 15-year-old girl. Like, look at that size difference. If the person you're in love with, top of their head lands to the top of your waist and they're not a dwarf, it might be an inappropriate relationship. But Hikaru's got some competition, as Lantis has pet fairy who hangs around him and is clearly obsessed with him. She's not the only person obsessed with him, though. Apparently Eagle is also in love with him. Luckily, they don't explore that too much. In spite of that, though, that his is actually said to be more believable than Hikaru's because they have history that happened off screen. Ascot falls in love with Umi, so he actually wills himself to grow up in order to go out with her. Oh, but joke's on him. She actually likes children because she falls in love with Clef for some reason. So this Ice Queen totally friend zones Ascot, but don't worry Ascot, because she's got competition for Clef as well. Persea, who is now dead, was apparently in love with him, and her identical twin sister, coincidentally, is also in love with Clef, because why not? But also, seriously, Ascot has some issues. Ascot, it is not a healthy relationship to fall in love with a girl because she slapped you.
But you just don't care at all!
And all these love stories they keep trying to force feed you are pretty pointless, especially when it comes to Hikaru, Umi, and Fu, because they're just visitors. By the end of the series, they'll be back in Earth, completely away from anyone they fell in love with. Even the one relationship that was actually set up well, Fu and Ferio, they're not gonna go anywhere with that relationship because they live in different worlds. But season 2 gives you that happy ending that you missed out on in the first season, and it sucks for it. All the melodrama and bad romance they try to cram down your throat just ruins this series. Do yourself a favor and do not watch the second season. I'm giving it 3 stars, but that's probably raising it from 2 stars because of the first season, which was significantly better and worth watching. So just watch the first season and skip the second. Time to make some JoJo references. When I first attempted to watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, I stopped before I even started because I looked in the comment section of the website I was using, and one of the commenters made it sound like you should watch the second season first. So they made it sound like they made the show out of order. I realized later, of course, that commenter was so wrong. I don't think they made it out of order. I think it just got worse as the seasons went on. Now, when you first hear about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, this is what you tend to get. This is a picture from the second season. So the second season is what you'll mostly hear about, which involves stands. Stands are the driving power in this anime in the second season, which are sort of like spiritual extensions of the person. If the stand dies, the person dies. And I went into the first season, which I watched on Netflix. So if they did mix up the first and second season, be warned that I'm going off the seasons the way Netflix portrayed them. But I went into the first season thinking stands were gonna show up at some point, in some way. They did not. They had absolutely nothing to do. There was no foreshadowing of stands or anything like that. I don't know if that mindset improved my overall enjoyment of the first season, but I do think you should go into a mindset of not knowing what supernatural forces are at work in the first season, because it actually takes its time getting there. So I'm actually going to say very little about the first season, other than the first season is 4 stars. It was great. Little Leighton showing that picture. There's 2 halves to the first season. First half has to do with Jonathan Joestar, and the second half has to do with Joseph Joestar. That's probably about as much as I'm willing to say on that. The third season has to do with Jotaro Joestar. Joseph is the grandson of Jonathan, and Jotaro is the grandson of Joseph. So the anime as a whole spans a couple hundred years, or at least 3 generations anyway. One major difference between the first and second season that really bugged me was the end credit music. The end credit music in the first season, both halves, was really well done and flowed with the anime and fit.
ストレイツを来るのを待ってたぜ。この程度で貴様が死ぬとは思わねえが、スピードワゴンじいさんの仇宣戦布告だぜ。
Well, now for a little behind the scenes. Somehow, OBS did not record 90% of the upcoming audio I had recorded for this. So now I have to re-record everything I had said earlier. It's happened before with Magic Knight Wraith, but that was a much smaller section and I didn't have to mention it. It was a much easier fix. But this is really annoying. I'm not entirely sure what all got dropped. Since I didn't script this out, I can't just reread the script. But going back to the end credit music, you just saw how the end credits for the first season worked really well, and kind of made you a little pumped for the next episode. The second season, on the other hand, decided to choose their music as if I was the one choosing the music. 'Cause the main plot of the second season is they have to go to Egypt to defeat somebody, I can't tell you who because of spoilers, in order to save Jotaro's mother. Because I guess he cares for some reason. If you know his character, you know that doesn't make any sense, really. He's not a well-written character. But the point is, because they're going to Egypt, the people who made the anime decided, hey, let's use Walk Like an Egyptian for the end music. And I like that song, but it just sounds terrible in this context. The whole, hey, they're going to Egypt, let's do Walk Like an Egyptian. That's the kind of thing I would do. And it's not good. Just sounds terrible. Another annoyance I have with the second season is, for some reason, they decide to change the color palette anytime they get in a fight, or maybe a particular moment in the fight. It doesn't make any sense. The only time it does make sense is when they're in a dream world, which the picture I use is actually from that. That one scene, that would make sense for them to change their color palette because they're in a dream. It doesn't make sense in all the other places they do it. Just makes it look like the animators are schizophrenic. And the last thing I need to talk about is a spoiler for the first season. So if you haven't seen the first season yet, just stop watching, skip to the next section or whatever. But I have to complain about this and I can't do it without spoiling the first season. Alright, your spoiler warning has passed. Joseph Joestar does not die in the second season. There is a point in the first season, whatever. There is a point in the first season where it really seems like he'll die, but he lives. And it's too bad that he lives too, because of what they do to him in the second season. In the first season, he was like a Sherlock Holmes type character. He was very smart and highly observant. Well, street smart anyway. But in the second season, they want Jotaro to be the guy, so they dumb down Joseph, even though he's much older and should be much smarter. But now he's just, at best, second fiddle. And Jotaro does not deserve that spotlight. He is an arrogant jerk who has no real depth to his character. Alright, hopefully that covers everything that got lost in my audio, so I can end the JoJo section just by mentioning that there are actually more than 2 seasons.
Oh my god!
But I haven't seen anything past the 2nd season. I'm just not that interested. So before I get started, I should mention that Berserk is not for children, so do with that what you will. And if you want to watch Berserk, skip the first episode. And if you haven't seen Berserk, skip this portion of my video, because the first episode of Berserk spoils the entire first season. So if you have not seen Berserk Season 1, stop watching this video and go watch it, skipping the first episode. And then once you skip the first episode and seen the entire first season, come back here and I'll explain why you did not want to see the first episode. Okay, now that everybody's back from watching the first season, if you start watching the first episode of Berserk, you get the idea that you're in for watching a demon slayer slay demons. But then, about maybe halfway through the first episode, or maybe at the end, they go into a flashback to explain his backstory. Then episode 2 comes, and you start watching this flashback, and then episode 3 comes, and it's still in the flashback, thinking, how long is this flashback gonna take? Then the 4th episode comes, and it's still the flashback. Now you're really starting to wonder if this is really a flashback, or if the first episode was a flash forward. And you'd be right. The entire first season is set up as one big flashback. Making the first episode, I believe, to be the biggest tease in all of anime. And this first season could have been so much better without that first episode. I might have given it 4 stars if they had cut out the first episode. Because throughout the entire first season, except that first episode, it seems like just a very normal anime about a soldier. Nothing supernatural going on. And then the last few episodes come on, and he basically gets branded an outlaw, his leader gets horribly mutilated, and then all of a sudden this egg is screaming and die and ground turn into faces, and a group of demons appear, resurrecting Guts' leader, and then his former leader rapes his girlfriend in front of him, and then the season just ends. And then you're like, what did I just watch? Or you would have been if the first episode had not spoiled you to the whole thing already. The entire end sequence would have been so much better if you hadn't seen it coming. But then they move on to season 2 eventually. I think it was almost like 20 years later when they finally did the 2nd season. And you finally get Guts as a demon slayer, slaying demons. But the animation is terrible. Just awful. And that really is the biggest downside to the 2nd season. You kinda get used to it, but it's still awful. Now, when I first started thinking about how to do this review, I was prepared to go on a whole rant about the 2nd season's inability to draw nipples. But I figured maybe it was just the dub being censored. So I watched the sub, and sure enough, there were nipples there. And then I went back and watched the dub and saw there were nipples there too. And now I don't know what to think. I could have sworn they just cut out the nipples when I watched it, which is to me worse than showing the nipples or finding some way to cover them up without using a black bar censor or fuzzy censor. I'm just all around opposed to censorship. If you don't want to show a naked woman's breasts, then just don't draw them. Don't edit it in post to take them out unless you're really clever about it. But now I'm thinking maybe it wasn't so much the difference between dub and sub, but the website that I used to watch it on, which is weird considering the website I used to watch it on. Unless I watched it on Netflix, I don't actually remember. Anyway, the last thing I have to complain about the 2nd season is that I do not know what prayer is. And I mean the people who wrote the anime do not know what prayer is. There is a scene where they're all holding torches to hold back a demon, and they all have to do their part, forming a circle, holding the torches out to keep the demon at bay. And Guts says to this lady, "Don't pray, because you need to hold your torch." As if praying somehow stopped you from holding the torch. Prayer is not some sort of ritual that has to be done a certain way. She can pray while holding the torch, and she should. So the first season could have been 4 stars, potentially, but because of the stupid first episode goes down to 3 stars. And then the second season gets even worse because of the horrible animation and the cringy, obvious atheist writers who treat religion like superstition. Second season gets 2 stars. In the world of Radiant, monsters periodically fall from the sky, and when a human comes into contact with these monsters, they gain magical powers, and also a curse. Our main character, I don't remember anyone's name from this anime. His curse is he got horns. This girl, I think her name begins with an M. Her curse is she has a split personality. That may come up later. So, What's-His-Face wants to stop the monsters from falling to the sky by finding where they're coming from, which is called Radiant. So he wants to find Radiant and stop the monsters. But nobody knows where it is. And while he's searching, he is pursued by the church. I forget the specific name of the church, but it's the typical church is the enemy, but actually not this guy. Although he works with the church, he is more of a voice of reason. And then he later defects, I think. Pretty sure. There's something else I noticed while watching Radiant, and it could just be a coincidence, or it could be the start of a new trope I'm noticing. Or maybe there's more animes that I don't know of that fit this thing. But so far, Radiant is only the second one to do this. But that is where the main character basically is shonen. He orphaned, father's missing, mother's dead, whatever. In this case, both his parents missing. And he has a maternal teacher, basically acts as a substitute mother. And she is clearly more skilled than him in terms of magic and skill, but she can't really help him because she's got her own curse. One is, you can't tell from the picture, but she's missing an arm, and also she has coughing fits. Also, she might actually be his mother. She doesn't have any memory, and he was too young to know, so she could just turn out to be his actual mother. So take a guess what anime I'm thinking of where the main character, who both his parents are gone, and he is taught by a maternal figure who herself cannot actually participate in the adventure because of a physical ailment of some sort. Okay, time's up. I'm talking about Full Metal Alchemist. Edward's teacher basically raises him and trains him, and she's clearly superior to him in skill, though his aptitude for alchemy does win out. But she lost several of her internal organs, so she can't really help all that much. So I had just noticed this similarity between these two animes. Let me know in the comments if you know of any other animes that fit this new trope of a shonen male protagonist raised or trained by a maternal figure who's better than him but can't outshine him because of some sort of infirmity. Radiant as a whole is so-so. The first season gets a low 3 stars. It's just something to watch if you need to watch something. Actually, checking my notes, I actually ranked it as a 2 stars, but that would mean the second season would have to go to a 1 star. And as bad as it is, I don't think I want to take even the second season down to a 1 star. But let's talk about the second season. There are 3 major problems with the second season, from my point of view. Only one of them is actually a major problem. The other 2 are, well, let's just go over them. The first one is toxic feminism. Generally speaking, Japanese animes do not succumb to toxic feminism per se. They do tend to put females more on an even playing field, unrealistically, but it always seems fair and balanced, and it doesn't feel like they're trying to force any feminist ideology down your throat. But season 2 of Radiant, I felt, came pretty close. Though it could be that I'm just hypersensitive to this sort of thing, and maybe I'm overblowing my memories of season 2. One of the focuses of season 2 is this lady, whose name, as usual, I don't remember, and her struggle to become a mage knight, but she's a woman in a man's army, even though they're ruled by a queen who everybody adores and respects. I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of the subtlety that gave me the impression of toxic feminism. I tried looking at one scene that I remembered and tried to see if it was the actors dubbing the lines incorrectly. So I compared it to the Japanese subtitles. But they matched, so I can't blame them. But even as I was looking at it, the scene didn't strike me as all that toxic as I had remembered it being. So it is entirely possible I'm just blowing this one out of proportion, but I'm still gonna mention it. Along with that is this scene where these two have a fight because he left without her because at the end of season 1 he transformed and lost control of himself and he could very much hurt her. And she's upset because she has multiple personalities, so she's going through the same thing. But, and here's my problem with it, she isn't. Her multiple personalities, or other personality, is not dangerous like his is. She's just rough, but she's still basically the same person. He is not. He is dangerous when he is transformed, and I did not like the way this scene played out. Next problem, and this one is technically bigger because I know I'm not blowing this one out of proportion, is Merlin. Specifically, the way Merlin reveals that he is indeed Merlin. I don't remember what he was calling himself before he revealed that. But when you first hear him talk about Merlin, it's obvious that he is Merlin. So it comes as no surprise to the audience. But of course, when he does reveal his name, it's got to be a surprise to everyone else. But the way they do it is just so terrible. His wife just died and he's crying over his wife and soliloquying about how she used to call him Merlin. And it was just so forced. Pretty much any other way they could have done to reveal that he is indeed Merlin would have been better. In fact, all they needed to do was just cut out his lines entirely, because later on, he reveals it to the city that he's attacking, because they all worship Merlin, so they go, "Merlin, save us!" And he goes, "You idiots, I am Merlin." That could have been the reveal. That would have been a perfect place to reveal it. Instead, they just do that terrible, terrible script writing. Last complaint, and this one is definitely the biggest, because those other two, they're one-offs. They're done when the season's done. This one has consequences for the future. This is a more general problem. So first, some background. During the time when I was watching this, my internet wouldn't always be the best. And sometimes the audio would keep going while the video would stop. And I'd have to pause the video to let the video catch up and then unpause so I can play it. Also, before I saw a second season around, I've heard that animators in Japan are having a hard time. I don't know the specifics. Maybe having a hard time finding work, maybe it's just too stressful or whatever. But this was the first time I realized they must be having it hard because they got real lazy on the animation here. Several times, the screen would pause. And I'd pause the screen thinking my video needed to catch up to the audio. And then nothing happens because the video was caught up to the audio. Several times, the animators decided that in order to save themselves work, they would just use still frames when someone is talking. You'd have two people on screen, and you'd show the person who wasn't talking, listening very intently. So intently that they weren't breathing, they weren't even blinking. The air couldn't even move their hair because they were just listening so intently. This was incredibly frustrating, because I never knew whether my internet was being slow or if they were deliberately freezing the screen to save themselves work. Radiant as a whole just isn't worth your time. It's not like Magic Knight Rayearth or JoJo's Bizarre Adventure where you can just watch the first season and be done with it. No, first season goes right into the second. So even though the second season is clearly worse than the first, they get the same score of 2 stars. When I first heard about Seven Deadly Sins, I was not terribly interested, because who wants to watch an anime where the main heroes are the living embodiment of the Seven Deadly Sins? But it turns out they weren't literal embodiments of the sins they represented. They were called the Seven Deadly Sins because each of them, as far as I could tell from the first season, each of them went to prison for a crime, and they had an association, a sin associated with that crime. Meliodas is Wrath because he destroyed an entire town. King is Sloth because he did nothing while the fairy forest was destroyed, and he was the king of fairies, so it was his job to do that. Diane is Envy because reasons. That's a little murky. Bon, I can't believe I remember so many names. Bon was Greed because he stole the Fountain of Youth. These two don't show up in the first season, so I won't even mention them. And I forget his name, which is kind of ironic. And the pig and the girl are just side characters, sort of. They're not Seven Deadly Sins, at least. So once I found out that the title of Seven Deadly Sins just referred to their status as criminals, it wasn't such a bad anime anymore. They were all still wanted, basically, for a crime they didn't commit, and by the end of the first season, they redeem themselves. But then we move on to the second season, which, out of any anime in this video, this had the biggest drop. Radiant was probably the worst overall, but Seven Deadly Sins fell the furthest, which is surprising given that it wasn't that great of an anime anyway. Just something to pass the time. But oh, that second season. So what did the second season do so bad? Well, they introduced the arch enemies of the Seven Deadly Sins. And can you guess what they were called? I will give you a hint. There were 10 of them.
No! God, please, no! No! No!
Well, it happened again. A huge chunk of audio got dropped, and I have to re-record it all. At least I know why it dropped. The eagle-eyed viewer might be able to tell, but I switched scenes in OBS to play the video clip, and I forgot to switch back to a scene that had my microphone on. This is not what happened with Magic Knight Rayearth, though. I still have no idea what happened with that one. Good thing it was such a short thing that you probably didn't notice if I didn't tell you. Anyway, that's right. They're called the 10 Commandments. Animes tend to have a habit of switching bad for good, but nothing as bad as this. This is just way too on the nose. And it is the main reason why the second season is such a failure. Although there are a couple other reasons. But first, before I get into those reasons, I will go ahead and give some credit to the commandments. They do have interesting power sets, at least in as far as I've seen. Each of the commandments have a commandment attached to them, and this commandment must be obeyed by literally everybody, including the person who has the commandment. It is an absolute ability. Take, for instance, the guy on the left. I can't point at him because this is a re-recording. The guy on the left with the horns. His commandment is obviously, thou shalt not lie. If you lie around him, anybody tells a lie in his presence, they will turn to stone, including him. The guy next to him in the middle, his commandment, I'm guessing is based on thou shalt not murder, because with him, you are not allowed to hate him, and he's not allowed to hate anybody either. But if you hate him, you will have no power over him, so you cannot kill him out of hate. And then the guy in the very middle at the bottom, I'm pretty sure his is based on thou shalt not have any other god before me. If you turn away from him, then you will be subject to him and basically be his puppet. I assume that means if he turns away from somebody, he will become their puppet because the commands are absolute. And those are the only 3 commands they actually explain in Season 2. I've seen a few of the others, but I have no idea what their actual commands are. And these are interesting powers, but unfortunately, they do not utilize them to their full effect. And not just because it's only the second season and they haven't gone through them all yet, but the thou shalt not lie guy. You would think that since his command is absolute and he could be turned to stone if he tells a lie, that they were going to find a way to have him, to trick him into lying. So he turns to stone. Technically, he did turn to stone, but they didn't trick him into it. They just forced his hand. He was dead one way or the other, and it takes all the fun out of it. What's the point of him dying to his own power if he was going to die anyway? And of course, all the commandments are basically rendered moot, all by the same guy, Escanor, the sin of pride, because he's just too strong. He overpowered the no-lying guy, so he was forced to run away and die. He doesn't hate people weaker than him, so he's unaffected by the no-hate rule, and I really don't see him as the kind of person to turn away. So, from all the commandments I've seen, none of them would seem to have any effect on him, which undercuts the entire interesting factor about them. All the anime has to do is just throw Escanor at everybody, and he'll just take them all on with no problem. And the last major issue with the second season is actually one that I forgot in my original recording, so I don't even have a picture for it. Maybe I'll find a picture and put it in post. But of course, this one is technically a spoiler, but for this bad of an anime, I don't care about spoilers. So Diane the giant, and King, the elf, king of the elves, or is it fairies? Fairies, not elves. They were basically childhood friends, or at least she was a child. Ages are really hard to tell with those two. And King was in love with Diane, but for some reason, because he had to go back to the fairy forest and he didn't want her missing him, he decided to erase her memory of him. Then comes the second season, and she starts to remember him finally. So she will finally return all these feelings that he obviously had for her in the first season. But wouldn't you know it, as soon as she gets her memories back, she gets amnesia again. Much worse amnesia, and forgets a lot more. She gets amnesia from the pink-haired sin of, is he the sin of lust? Yeah, I guess it's lust, even though that doesn't exactly make sense. But he's also secretly a commandment, too, which they didn't explain that in the second season, so I don't know any more about that. But he can alter people's memories, and he got in a fight with Diane and decided to erase all her memories, because he's a jerk. And this whole double amnesia really pissed me off. And then we move on to the third season, which I never watched, but I've heard plenty about it. All throughout this video, each of these animes have had second seasons that felt like they were done by a completely different studio. And maybe in some cases they have. I don't actually know which ones have and haven't, although Berserk probably was. Seems pretty obvious. But the third season of Seven Deadly Sins was done by a different studio, or at least a different animation studio. That much I do know. And it looks awful. If this picture is actually from the third season, I just don't know how animators could do such a poor job. I mean, just look at that. She looks normal, and he looks like something I could draw with a little bit of practice. How do you have two such different examples of animation in the same picture? I hope somebody was fired. Even though I don't care about the third season and don't plan to watch it, I still hope somebody was fired for that. The first season of Seven Deadly Sins gets a mediocre 3 stars. The second season, the only reason I'm not giving the second season 1 star is because I actually did watch the entire second season. The whole turning good into evil and evil into good trope is atrocious in the second season, but the commandments do have interesting powers. The third season gets... I'm trying to decide whether I want to give the third season 1 or 0 stars. I didn't see it, so I guess technically I have to give it 0 stars. I said Radiant is overall worse, but I would watch season 3 of Radiant before I watch season 3 of Seven Deadly Sins. To recap, Radiant gets 2 stars. Magic Knight Rayearth, if you watch only the first season, 4 stars. But the second season is 3 stars at best. Berserk, if you skip the first episode and only watch the first season, it might be 4 stars. Otherwise, it is 3 stars at best. Seven Deadly Sins starts so-so and just plummets terribly to a miserable 2 stars. And JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, best off just watching the first season, because that is 4 stars. Second season, 3 stars. But I guess if you want to get all the memes, you can watch the second season. It's not unwatchable, just a stark contrast to the great first season it had. And in the next episode, I will be covering animes that had wasted potential. See you next time.